Okay, so let's start off. What is underrated? Is it album sales? Is it critical reviews? Does it just sound good and no one pays attention? Well, it's kind of all of that and a little bit more. What do I mean? I don't know what I'm talking about right now. I'm kind of winging this right now. So I'm kind of going off the heart. Alright, I'm going to start off with Hum. Downward is Heavenward. Sold about 30,000 copies, I read somewhere online. Famously known for their song Stars on their You'd Prefer an Astronaut album. Little zebra with a green background. Sound familiar? Well, this is their follow-up record, and I think nobody talks about this at all. Even between some Hum communities online, which is kind of weird. But I think people talk about this album not as much because probably it's hard to follow a record like You Prefer an Astronaut, which I think is almost perfect. There are some tunes that are not boring, but I think are just like whatever. And then this follow-up record is pretty, what is it? It just sounds more like space. I think the guitar on a bunch of songs like Green to Me, songs like Dreamboat are much more in your face and kind of more catchy than any of that riffs on You Prefer an Astronaut. Honestly, it just feels more fun. It feels like they had a bunch of paint. They just like splattered a bunch of stuff on a canvas and they said, you know what, stick with it, do it, I want this. Online, I do hear a lot of people talk about their album before You'd Prefer an Astronaut, and that was Electra 2000, which, by the way, it seems like a different band when you look at all these albums, this 3-album run. Starting with Electra 2000, it's way more aggressive, way more heavy riff, heavy drums, which, by the way, the drummers who sadly passed away was phenomenal. I look back at all the drums on You Prefer an Astronaut, I'm just like, what? No way, can't be possible. But yeah, it's hard to follow up a record like You Prefer an Astronaut because of their hit Stars and songs like The Pod, which is so abrasive in your face with some amazing vocals. And people really don't like the vocals from this band, which I think is ridiculous. I don't even think he's a bad singer. When I hear this, I feel like it's just a different type of singing. It's much more talking, but it's not like he cannot sing. People are acting like he just is terrible. Downward is Heavenward, criminally underrated. It's almost like people forget it exists. Hum did come back 20 years later and make a follow-up record, Inlet, which was awesome, by the way. I think some of their best stuff lyrically, maybe not instrumentally, but I think that album is really good too. Next up, the band Failure, which I have on my shirt right now. Look at that, Failure. Famously known because of their Fantastic Planet album, which should garner a bunch of attention, if not more, from more people around the world and more people in different universes, because that's what it sounds like when you listen to that album. But I'm going to talk about their 1992 album, Comfort, which is completely not overlooked, but I think a lot of these albums are not talked about enough, in my opinion, when it comes to alternative rock in the 90s or 90s music in general. But I think Failure's Comfort album is way more dark, not sinister, but I guess sinister. And I think that's really interesting when you look at their albums that they made after that, which are more sonically beautiful and stuff like that. But this Comfort album is really, really good. Songs like Macaque. But yeah, the songwriting on here and the instruments, it's darker, and I think that's what draws me to it a bit more, because albums like Magnified and Fantastic Planet, which are great in their own right, are really, really, really good. But Magnified has a recipe for Fantastic Planet, if that makes sense. And Fantastic Planet is just the end of the recipe, which is the meal, or whatever you want to say. So yeah, I think Comfort has more tracks that interest me. Who Am I? I don't know, man. I just think that's the bottom line. Ooh, this next album I'm a huge fan of, and a lot of people know this band, Blind Melon. Blind Melon with the famous hit No Rain on their Blind Melon self-titled record debut album, all of that jazz. It followed it up in 1995 with the album Soup, which is overlooked because unfortunate death of Shannon Hoon in 1995 from a drug overdose. I think this album is so beautiful and way more interesting than the first album that I like, actually. Soup offers a lot more, I guess, diversity in tracks like Galaxy and Mouthful of Cavities, two different universes, and it's on the same album, which is kind of crazy to me. It's beautiful. I've always loved Shannon Hoon's voice. I think he's an amazing songwriter. I think the bassist, I believe his name is Brad, but he also writes some of the songs, but he's also fantastic. Everybody in this band is really overlooked. People know Blind Melon because of No Rain, which is fine, but there's so much more to listen to. There's so much more to look after. It's really sad looking back. It's a shame the band disintegrated because of the death of Shannon Hoon, but they're still kicking it today with a new singer, and I think that's beautiful. Let's move on to Babes in Toyland's Nemesisters. What a beautiful, rocking, chaotic, colorful chaos album. Kat Bjelland's voice is so amazing in my opinion. I think it's such a unique voice. She puts a twang in it, serious twang sauce inside of her voice, which is really different, and I really like different because you don't really want to hear the same thing. So I think it's an interesting take on her vocals, and they can play instruments too, obviously. Of course, they have some wicked riffs. They have their most popular song, Sweet 69, on here, and I think they got a lot of love back in the 90s. When I hear about bands, talk about bands, they're mentioned and they're shown respect and all that. But between the younger crowd like myself and people who don't really look into older bands, I think should listen to Babes in Toyland because they'll always rock, in my opinion. I don't think any of their albums sound outdated or boring or bland, all of that stuff. They capture a moment in time very well, and that moment is Babes in Toyland. And finally, the last album I'll be talking about from the band Helium, The Dirt of Luck. What a beautiful album, a cartoonish sounding album with a beautiful 90s alternative sauce inside. That's the best way I can describe this album, and I wouldn't have it any other way, any other words. When I first heard this album, I was completely floored because it was fairly recent actually when I started listening to this album. I think it was because I was on Spotify recommended artists and they popped up, and I'm glad they popped up because wow. This album, really, I've never heard of this band, to be honest. And the singer's voice, sorry, I did not look up the singer's voice, which I should have done, but she has such a beautiful voice, and I feel like this group is so overlooked because it's taken me forever to even find this band, which it kind of is lucky I found this band, The Dirt of Luck. I think they should have blown up way more than they did because I didn't know about this band at all. It really does resonate with me because it reminds me of video game soundtracks from the early 2000s and cartoons from the early 2000s or even 90s, stuff like Daria, stuff like I can't think of anything else, but yeah, you get the point. That's a fun direction when on an album. I don't think they intended to do that, but they just captured something in my brain, and my brain accepted it and was completely bamboozled by such a beautiful record. I think they deserve a lot of love. I think all these bands deserve a little bit more love than they get. And yeah, well, that's the video. Sorry, it's taken me a long time to come back and do these videos again. I'm gonna try to do more consistent. I'm really in the corner of my room right now and nervous AF. I feel like a crazy person talking in here, but you know, whatever. Okay, goodbye.